welcome to Byte Live 2020, This is Progress. My name is Izzy Ashton and I'm the Deputy Editor of Byte at Creative Brief. Although this year is unlike any other, marked by pervasive global uncertainty, our event series this year is determined to celebrate inclusive industry leaders, stereotype-busting campaigns, and the hope that a new generation of creatives bring. The conversation we're having today explores how the industry's obsession with age is undermining progress. So I'd just like to welcome our speakers today. First up, we have Anna Dalziel, who is the founder of 40 Over 40 and Director of Brand at Momentum Worldwide. 40 Over 40 is a world-first platform celebrating the talent and experience of over 40s in the advertising, marketing, and media industries. So welcome, Anna.
Hi.
Alongside Anna is Tag Warner, the CEO of Gay Times. He joined the company almost 2 years ago at the age of 24, and since then has built the brand up from a publication into a media organization.
Hello.
So welcome, Tag. So the dual narrative at the heart of the conversation about ageism is that on the one hand, the industry fetishizes youth, but doesn't want to listen to their voices, while simultaneously ostracizing those over the age of 35 to the point where many are forced out of the industry altogether. So too old, too young, but what is just right? Tag, if I can start with you.
Sure. I mean, I guess in answer to the question, what is just right is how everybody currently is. I think that what I'd love is for us to move to a society, but definitely an industry that we have an ability to change and influence ourselves, where we not just respect, but understand the sort of equity that people bring to their roles based on their own identities, characteristics, personalities, etc. I think it's kind of interesting because there's enough times, for example, where I've seen the argument being used in the wrong way on both sides. So people saying, I'm a young person and I'm the audience myself, so I know better than you, person in the room. But then also the other side where I've noticed people in meetings that I've been in say, well, I've been in this business for 20, 30 years, Tag, so I know what I'm talking about. And again, those both for me are negative. It's because even the person saying, I've been in the room for 20, 30 years, so I know what I'm talking about, I get this business. Although I respect that, they're almost using their age and that characteristic as the reason why they should be listened to, rather than what they're bringing to the table. So I guess for me, what is just right is how everybody is. What we need to do is learn how to learn, listen, respect one another, and then take into account each other's perspectives in a way that's then meaningful to drive the conversation forward.
Yeah, definitely. I think that point about listening is so important, isn't it? And Anna, I guess kind of how pervasive do you think the stereotypes around age are within the creative industries, and what impact do you think that this is having on progress?
I mean, I think ageism is one of the many, inequalities that society is currently facing. And I do believe that some of this is done consciously and some of it subconsciously. I'm in no doubt that it's happening in other industries too. You know, it's not just in the marketing, media and advertising industry that this happens. I think for the majority of my career, it's clear the focus has definitely been on the rise in talent. You know, every kind of one of the reasons why, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, you know, set up 40 Over 40 is continuing through my career of seeing, 30 under 30, ones to watch, rising talent. And I understand why that has happened previously, and I think it's just to try and keep businesses current. And I'm not saying, by the way, that sort of demographic of people isn't important. They 100% are, but it's now time to find balance. And I think to your point earlier, Tag, it's about how, the different identities and the diverse people and what they bring to the table. And there's no right or wrong. I think it is really just about having, whether it's age, gender, race, just having a diverse group of people. So I think balance is the key word, and it's long overdue. Yeah. And I do think these sort of preconceptions are stopping people from progressing and making them leave the industry, and that's affecting how they are seen by the world and themselves. And it definitely has to be addressed so we can move forward.
Yeah. And I mean, just to elaborate, would you be able to just kind of talk a little around why you decided to set up 40 Over 40? And I guess, like, why do you think the industry has such an obsession with age?
I mean, like I said earlier, after sort of recognising and discussing at length how many sort of 30 under 30 lists and awards there are, I launched 40 over 40 with two industry friends, so Anna Scholes and Charlotte Reed, because we really wanted to take action. And we talked about it at length last summer, and it was just over a lunch, we were like, why don't we do it? You know, nobody's actually done it. Wouldn't it be great? And we could really make a difference. And we want things to change in the advertising, marketing and media industry. You know, having been in the industry myself for over 20 years, I've witnessed lots of kind of changes and innovations, but not really around the views and the negative stigma about aging in ad land. I feel like even when I was in my 20s, 30s, you know, people were still talking about ageism. And I think people over 40 are not considered to be valuable, experienced and smart, which, you know, quite frankly is ridiculous. Because they are. Numbers are not celebrated, they're hidden and they're not discussed. Yeah,
that's such a good point, actually. And Tag, how do you think we can really work to dismantle those taboos around age and sort of simply see and celebrate the creative mind instead?
Well, I guess it comes into sort of a question about how we see society and how we see our role as advertisers and marketers within that society. I mean, one of the experiences that I had, of course, coming in relatively fresh to this industry was how rigid and how much construct there was about certain perspectives of society. So, for example, if we talk about it from an age perspective, we like to chop everything up into nice, neat boxes of demographics and then decide what we're going to attach to those demographics because of life moments or things that we expect those people to do. And it does make me think about like how my own parents spoke to me. You know, there's an age to meet your significant other. There is an age to get married. There is an age to have a house. And of course, what marketers do really well is then say, well, we're going to attach those sorts of life moments to products or services that we think are going to be important to you. And of course, what we're seeing at the moment is all of that just fragmenting over time. So that all of these things, such as when is the time that you're married, shifting quite drastically. Also, when people are sort of investing in a home, are they doing it as a couple all the time? Not as much anymore. Do people necessarily have an assumption that they're going to absolutely have children and therefore be completely useless because they're now a parent and therefore they couldn't possibly have anything to add to their career? Like all of those things are being dismantled. And I think what we need to do actually, and this is where I get a little bit preachy about it, as an industry, is wake up and realize that society is now moving quicker than us and we need to reflect that. I've been in a lot of rooms with some, albeit great creative directors, telling me how our industry leads and how we're disruptive and we're challenging. And we're so not. We're really not. We're really following a lot of what's already going on in society, because society now happens obviously on people's phones via their own media. They're not being led by this big sort of wider media mixed machine anymore, quite as much as they were perhaps being done 20, 30 years ago, where the whole narrative was a lot cleaner and more constructed, and therefore the societal values that we pushed onto people were much more cleaner. Because people have that ability now to live a more authentic life, to have an identity which doesn't fit into a certain box, that impact is huge. And it means that we need to stop looking at age as something that we can use as a definer and becoming a little bit more understanding that there's multiple different things that define a person's individual moment in their life, and then maybe how they do interact with the products or the services that we as marketers and advertisers are trying to convey to them or talk to them about. So I guess for us, I think it starts within the industry, because I would like to say it's already happening. I know plenty of people who don't feel under a certain pressure to get married or to have children. It's already happening, and we don't really need to be, saying that we're leading with that from an example perspective by doing this incredible advertisement where, we're showing a really diverse couple, which is really sort of representative of the real world, because that already exists. And if anything, we're not quite as diverse as we think we are. We're not being as representative as we think we are. And I think what's happened in the last 12 months is a few people in the industry, actually more than a few people, a lot of us are starting to realize that and take note and go, okay, we aren't quite as sort of trailblazers as we maybe like to think we are and have been. maybe what we need to do is to look at what's happening in the real world, dismantle our whole idea of what society looks like, not just about age. Of course, when we talk about gender, like orientation, identity, religion, we need to deconstruct a lot of that and then reapproach the subject. So I'd like to put it into sort of a bigger pool in a way.
Do you not think, Tag, that, you know, from a creative director's perspective, though, I do think, you know, that there are opportunities, though, to suggest the creative should reflect the society as well, because I'm not sure that everybody is on board with that. And we see that quite a lot. But then I think, to your point around without putting people in boxes, I think some creative folk are maybe going too extreme and feeling like they have to make sure that they include this or that, you know, to ensure. So it's trying to get the balance, I think.
Totally. And I think that's why I talk about like authentic representation and reflection.
Yeah.
One room I was in, talking about a particular ad campaign was it really impacted me though, and it really made me think about, I think, kind of what you're saying, which is, I think that the agency was, as you're saying, pushing too far into that direction. And there was a Black person in the room who was part of the creative team, and they said, the way that they said it, and not my words, their words were, a Black person wouldn't do that though. And it was just the way that they described it that obviously it was an injunction to the whole room of other white people to make them think, I think, kind of to your point of like, oh, we've essentially put this person, because we want to appear more diverse, into a situation that doesn't feel accurate or authentic at all. And no one had actually considered that. And of course, the person in the room that was then able to say, you really need to think about this, because this doesn't happen in real life. Now, of course, they can't speak for a whole community, I know, but I think that point was really valid. So yeah, authentic representation, of course, is super important. And you're right, those sorts of experiences that I was describing are absolutely valid for so many people, and they are things that we can kind of latch onto. I think my point is that they're not valid for everybody in a way that we used to assume and make the assumption that we could be pretty sure that all of those boxes are so neat and tidy.
Yeah, and I guess kind of, Anna, building on that from the sort of creative perspective, how can we change the narrative and sort of show that those different perspectives are valued within business and then also reflected within the marketing and advertising that businesses are creating?
I mean, I think we need to see different faces, hear different voices in our industry. And I do think, you know, to the point earlier around even the adverts that we create, I think they need to be reflected, you know, again, in our industry, in our media. And I think, look at the people who head up marketing agencies, brands, and sit on associations and boards. I think to truly change, we need to see the change with our own eyes. I know how important this is, certainly for me, because I'm, you know, multicultural and I'm a female, and you know, I sit on a board and I'm in my 40s. So all of these things are, you know, quite close to my heart, I would say. I think we definitely need to see more. We absolutely need to see more diversity.
Yeah.
To add to that as well, who's judging success? Because that's one thing that I think, beyond, as you say, the representation internally, who's on the boards, but because we are an industry that seems to be also obsessed with awards and like being able to be rated, who's on the judging table? Because for so many things that we've been involved in, I think like, oh, there's a bunch of white guys all on the table judging. So what's going to represent, sort of resonate with them isn't going to be what resonates maybe with you, Anna, or with me. So
yeah, agree.
Yeah, and I think to that point, it's really interesting. Do you think that the industry is losing out commercially because of its attitude to age? So, for example, the sort of inability to depict older women in advertising without kind of pigeonholing them, or conversely, always relying on the stereotype of young people being avocado eating, latte sipping snowflakes. You know, if we're reliant on those stereotypes, are we losing out commercially?
I mean, I think we definitely are. And again, you know, the point around advertising should reflect the society we live in. I don't think it's just about age, quite honestly. It's gender, it's race. It's, you know, you look at ethnic minorities and they're still very much underrepresented in advertising. And I think that's perhaps because brand marketing teams aren't as diverse as they should be. So again, you know, just the point around just making it balanced. But I definitely think we are, you know, the industry is losing out from a commercial perspective for sure.
Tag, have you got anything to add on that one?
Yeah, for sure. I think, of course, around this topic, I think age is a clear one. I think from my perspective, I understand areas, of course, like the LGBTQ identity kind of spectrum and how people identify within that. Of course, we also work a significant amount within race, within religion. And I think there's a huge amount that the industry is kind of missing out on because they're not seeing the opportunity there. What they're seeing is a lot of the time is a bit of a problem that either we can avoid or we can try and tackle in some way, but not seeing it in a sort of positive, opportunistic way, when a lot of the time it is. I kind of talk quite a lot about the fact that there's lots of queer people out there that would love lots of goods and services, but they're not really being spoken to in any way authentically. Whereas a lot of the time, I'm sure we can all relate, that conversation has been a problem in the room of like, oh, how are we going to tackle that? How are we going to get to those people? It feels a bit difficult when actually I'm like, there's a huge number of consumers there at the end of the day that are kind of ready and waiting to be spoken to in a way that feels genuine. But we're looking at it in some sort of like negative attitude. And although I don't know, obviously, as much from an age perspective, I can't imagine it's much different in that way. It's seen not in a positive light a lot of the time, when of course there's loads of opportunity there.
Yeah, I think that point about the language used is a really valid one. You know, it's a problem to be tackled rather than a perspective to be championed and empowered. And it is, yeah, perhaps it's as much about dismantling the language we use to speak about age as it is about getting the kind of different perspectives in the room.
Yeah. And maybe that's an education piece, you know, that's something that's rooted in the way that we're brought up, I guess.
Yeah, it's always a sharp intake of breath before people start these conversations and meetings, and you know how the tone's going to be then.
Yeah, and I think to your point, Tag, earlier about kind of societal structures, about the way that we put kind of markers around age, perhaps that's, do you think, I mean, I guess questions to you both, maybe off the back of that earlier point, do you think that's kind of the job of advertising and marketing, to also try and kind of dismantle those societal moments that have been so ingrained for so long? Because by doing that, you're kind of taking the weight out of the expectation around what you should do at various ages.
I think so, to an extent, because we want to show an alternate. We want to show an alternate narrative. And, you know, to the point earlier, I think that also means that it's not going to be valid for everybody. Some people that will work for them, but we should be showing an alternate. I think I was brought up in a very typical way of respect your elders. It's just the thing that gets ingrained within you from day one. Now, I've often challenged myself with that, to think like, was I disrespecting my elders in a sense of the way that I managed to sort of trailblaze my way through and to get into the position that I'm in? Of course, because there was lots of people who were far more ingrained in this industry than I was, that I was like, I'm more, you know, I'm better than you would be in this role. I know that I can do it to a better degree. And I think that obviously requires you to have a certain amount of confidence, but you also need to sort of disregard something that's been drummed into you, which is, I remember having conversations with people going, well, I've got 10 years industry experience in publishing. You've got 0 as far as I can see. And I was like, yeah, I do have 0. And I had to disregard that construct, which is respect the person in the room who is older, more senior than you. So it's difficult. I struggled with that quite a lot. So I think we're all victim to sort of like almost pushing back sometimes and being like, this is so ridiculous. So I think it's just that whole thing again about trying to respect each other for what we're worth, and then it comes in a less combative approach.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's about sort of feeling empowered to have a voice within that room. So I guess kind of a question for you, Tag, perhaps. I mean, I feel like the industry has for too long insisted on speaking for rather than working with different communities. And so how do you think people can empower the voices of those communities to speak up rather than be spoken for?
I guess the first thing that I think is a great way to approach this is just by respecting and placing the same value on that person's voice than on your own. Because it's quite easy for us, especially when we are in these lovely rooms with people, obviously either virtually at the moment, but to think that we do know better because we have been doing this, or that we can speak on behalf of them because we understand the market, we understand the community. If you can kind of try and amend that like way that you think about it by placing their voices as an equal value, you do end up, I think, naturally opening up a little bit more and listening and letting those people, those communities tell you what they would like rather than you telling them or assuming what they'd like. And I think about midway through last year, I founded our charity partnership, which is called Amplifund. And it is around supporting LGBTQ and activist media-based organizations in different global environments. But it's also set up on the sort of foundation that we, as a UK and US-based media organization, do not understand the LGBTQ experience in places like Jamaica or Iraq or Armenia, where we're based. And that was all around having a conversation, opening up a conversation to say that our voices are no better than their voices. And if anything, it's now time for us to empower their voices and listen to what they have to say, rather than us imposing the narrative onto them of how awful it must be to be you, and come with all that sort of patronization and condensation that you often see within, I think, media and advertising. So for me, it's really important, and it's about sort of an equilibrium thing first and foremost.
Yeah. And Anna, you sort of got anything on that point of kind of, empowering the voices of people who maybe have been spoken for
I
too
think
long.
we've all got a voice, right? And I think it's important businesses ask open-ended questions to all of their employees, so it's not just a tick boxing exercise, and then really listen. So I think listening is key. I also think it's really important to allow to have like an open and honest space, a safe space to have like a two-way conversations, super important as well. So I think businesses need to do that and need to offer that certainly to their employees.
Yeah, definitely. And sort of maybe finally a question for you both. What would your one piece of advice be to individuals and organizations looking to create a more representative and inclusive workforce? Maybe Anna, if I could kick off with you.
Sure. I think first and foremost, look at your leadership. Do you have a healthy leadership? And is your leadership diverse and inclusive? That would be the first piece of advice that I would definitely recommend.
I think from my perspective, it's understanding the sort of, I guess, privilege you have in certain spaces, rooms. Yeah. That might be the fact that you're privileged to even be in the organization itself. It might be what floor you sit on. It might be what room you're allowed into. And I think if we have an understanding and try and help educate and resource up both individuals within organizations to become better aware of what their privilege is, I found that often helps to people to understand how they can then foster a more at least inclusive environment and culture first and foremost. And only then can you hope to start doing that within your workforce itself. The amount of times people have said to me, oh, we've really tried so hard to diversify our workforce, but people just don't really seem to take to, like, people don't want to work here. And I'm like, well, what does that say to your culture? What does that say to the way that you're speaking or treating people, the way that you're making assumptions based on should they be the sort of person to batter their way through your door because they think, oh, I want what they have. And a lot of the time I'll speak to people in our community and I'll be like, no, thanks, I'm good. Like, I don't need to be in there. And yet a lot of the times I've seen leadership kind of go into a space where they get a bit sort of put off by it and say, well, I've tried hard, so they should be trying hard as well to come to my table. And I'm like, do you have any idea how privileged you are to be able to even say that?
Yeah.
So I think if we can understand that more as individuals who lead organizations and people that have influence in the industry, then we can start to create an atmosphere where that will get better. Of course, the more sort of hard, let's just plot quotas on everything and drive it down that route, I understand the pros and cons there. But I think, unfortunately, it disregards an entire sort of part of our work life, which is all about how we feel and how we kind of come to work as individuals.
And I agree with your point around quotas, but I think sometimes you almost need to have KPIs within businesses, to hold people accountable. You see so many different brands and agencies signing up to this and that, pledges for this, pledges for that. But I think ultimately, we need to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable to really make change.
Yeah, absolutely. And with that transparency, it's amazing what happens when you're transparent with what your commitment is, because as soon as people outside know, they'll also hold you to account as well. And it won't just be an internal thing that you can say, oh, we missed it. Don't worry.
Yeah. Very good points. And I guess sort of with 5 generations attempting to navigate the new challenges of remote working together, perhaps, as you've both shown, it's worth listening to and learning from the perspectives that have for too long been dismissed, to recognize that now more than ever, we all have things to learn from each other, regardless of our age. So thank you both so much to Anna and Tag for such an expansive and really honest conversation, and to you all for tuning in. Follow along on the @BiteTrends Twitter thread to find out more about Bite Live 2020, catch the latest sessions and read exclusive takeaways from the week's discussions. Have a lovely rest of your day. Thanks very much.
Thank you.